Or you can shut it off, because I'm not going to do this. Shut it off and then put it on when he sits down and introduces us.
Okay.
Are we ready to roll? Got light?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to the Meat and Potato Show. Conservative Talk and Awesome Rock. I am your host, Christopher Mader, and I am very honored today to have, you are president of the Northeast?
Well, my title is, actually my title is New England Coordinator.
Right.
I cover 5 of New England states and upstate New York.
Ladies and gentlemen, Al Shurtleff from the John Birch Society. Thank you.
Well, a pleasure coming
You
on.
and I have run into each other a few times.
I knew that this is the pinnacle of my career, making it on your show, eating potatoes.
Actually, the show it's growing really, really large. I mean, this thing that I've got coming up on August 30th, the candidate symposium, is the amount of candidates showing up is growing. I've got 3 media outlets that are showing up. It's going to be here. Basically, all the candidates are going to sit around here. We're going to film from over there, and we'll set up chairs and stuff. I'm actually going to move furniture because I'm looking at the room. And anyway, it's getting big. So you're right. It is the pinnacle of your career.
Well, I've been on the David Bretnoy show, if you remember Dave.
Yes.
From WBC, but this is
That was a while ago. Yeah, is he still around?
He passed away.
Oh, God. Anyway, let's get into it. So tell us about the history of the John Birch Society, and tell the history to my audience of who John Birch was.
Okay, well, the organization was founded back in 1958 by Robert Welch, the late Robert Welch of Belmont, Massachusetts. And for those of you who are about my age, I know you think, well, he looks pretty young, but I'm actually 55. He was the inventor of the Sugar Daddy and Welch's Fudge Bar and Junior Mints and other great things. But he was a student of history and born in 1899 in North Carolina. Came up here, he actually learned how to read at the age of 2. By the age of 7, he read a 9-volume history of the world, read past history of the world. I have a copy of that, and it's challenging for anybody, never let alone a 7-year-old. So he was a genius. He graduated from college at the age of 16, long before there were Pell Grants. You know, when college was really a challenge. And went on to Harvard Law School, where he had lunch with Felix Frankfurter, who became Supreme Court Justice, a socialist. And he left and going into the candy business. Had a great love of our country, a great love of our history. And it was after World War II that he realized there was some serious problems in our country. And he wrote a few books in the early 50s. He wrote one book called May God Forgive Us. It was a story of how elements in our nation betrayed China into the hands of the communists. And then he came across the story of this young, remarkable young missionary turned intelligence officer, Captain John Morris Birch, and how he was killed. John Birch was a missionary to China from Macon, Georgia. He was only in his early 20s. He was a missionary for the Baptist Church. Had a great desire to serve God in that capacity. He spoke the Chinese language, the various dialects, and had a real desire to. In fact, he was going to stay in China had he survived the war. Sure. Anyway, he was in occupied China. The Japanese had already been firmly entrenched in China. And during the Doolittle raid, the famous Doolittle bombing mission over Tokyo, there was, I think, 16 planes, and some of them, all of them, they couldn't land. They had to go back to the carrier. That's right. They couldn't land. So he rescued 2 of the crews, including Doolittle himself. And it was that time he wanted to be a chaplain. And General Claire Chennault, the famous Flying Tiger, said, I don't need chaplains, I need intelligence men. So he served as an intelligence officer. He was quite a heroic man. He kept behind enemy lines. He had a great network of communications network. If there was a flyer that was down, they got it within no time. And many times he'd go on the missions, the bombing missions, to pinpoint. So war was over, the truce was signed, he was on an assignment. He was stopped by a patrol of Chinese communists and brutally murdered by these people who were supposed to be our very good former allies. So Robert Welch was so impressed by this young, courageous man that he decided, with the permission of his parents, to name the organization in his honor. He considered him to be the first victim of the Cold War or World War III.
Sure, what a story that is.
In fact,
And I knew some of the story, but I wanted you to tell it to the audience and the camera, because that is quite a
he
story.
wrote a book called The Life and Times of John Birch, which is available on Amazon. There was also another book published in the early 80s that we didn't publish ourselves. It was called The Secret File on John Birch. Melanoma Gable from Texas. And they made the conclusion that had the American people been told about the brutal murder of John Birch, there may not have been a Korean War. In a Vietnam War. It was so.
It wasn't covered up. It just wasn't.
It was covered up.
Well,
It was covered up, and but Mrs. Birch did get the truth.
Amazing.
And even today, it's not that well known.
No, it's not. I wasn't sure, but I
So Robert Welch, he wrote a few books. He started a magazine called One Man's Opinion, which you can find online in PDF form.
Yeah, I read a little bit of stuff.
And then he started a magazine, became American Opinion, as now it's called The New American. But he realized magazines were good and books were good, but you need to have a grassroots organization that would be actually a part of the media. Long before they had cable TV and they had internet
and portable cameras.
They also had YouTube. So he decided to start an organization that would be local, that would be a network of chapters all over the country. In December of 1958, he got together some of his colleagues from the American Manufacturing Association, and he met in a home in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a private residence. And he gave a 2-day presentation, and that was the founding meeting. In fact, one of the early members was right here in Worcester, Bob Stoddard.
Really?
Mr. Stoddard was the CEO of Wyman Gordon, and he also owned the Telegram and Gazette.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Right here in the city.
Right here in Worcester, yeah.
That's unbelievable. Now, JPS has been influential in politics basically since its start, hasn't it?
Well, what happened was...
But they tend to get a bad rap from the left, so why don't you...
Well, what happened was one of our earliest projects, the Birch Society members took out ads, not to sell things, but as public service announcements in newspapers when Khrushchev was coming to this country. He was coming here on this wonderful tour, red carpet tour.
Oh, right.
And Khrushchev was a bloody butcher. He was involved. He was responsible for the Ukrainian famine and many, many other things. So our public service announcement just simply spelled out what he was responsible for. And his trip was pretty much a disaster, a failure. In fact, Walt Disney wouldn't allow him into his Disney World in California.
He wouldn't allow him?
Yes. And Khrushchev went back to the Soviet Union, and he said there are forces in the United States that must be publicly whipped, made to suffer the torments of hell. And within a very short time of that meeting, the Communist Party meeting, I think it was in '61, the communist publications in this country had labeled us fascist, anti-Semitic, and a good step away from Hitlerite goon squad.
Really?
Well, most people don't pay much attention to communist publications, and if they did, they'd say that the opposite was most likely true. But some of that information was trickled into the mainstream media.
Sure. Now, that raises a question, going a little out of the topic here, but what do you think is this resurgence of leftist ideology and communist ideology in America today? I mean, it was big in that it was fought over in the 50s, but throughout the 60s, especially the late 60s, and the protesters, it seemed to rear its ugly head again. It seemed to have died off a little bit in the late 70s. Reagan came along, but I've got to say it, since the advent of Obama, it's had rebirth.
The ideology's been there right along.
Well, I know, what I'm saying is here in America.
The influence has been there right. Just look at the Republican Party. It is really the neoconservative perspective. The neoconservatives, and the word conservative really doesn't belong there.
Sure, of course.
These are really big government supporters that maybe want to see an efficient government, but a big government. And most of the early neocons were all disciples of Trotsky, so they were anti-Soviet, anti-communist, but still socialists. And this is an interesting read about just look at the neoconservative movement, that there's nothing conservative about them.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people today who have neoconservative worldview because they think that's the only true conservatism. So when they hear things like we should abolish the Federal Reserve Bank and we should get out of the UN, well, that's not neoconservative. That sounds kind of radical, but that's traditional conservatism, what they call paleoconservatism. The U.S. Constitution should be adhered to. And if we're going to send people out to war, we should declare war first.
Exactly.
You know, there are so many things that neoconservatives have no trouble doing, circumventing the Constitution. And that's the problem. And of course, you have academia and media.
And that's where you see it mostly, especially more so today.
Exactly. But thanks to...
Wasn't it part of the Communist Manifesto, or part of the theory that since they couldn't overthrow us militarily or overthrow us by any other type of force, was to get into the universities, get into areas of
the Communist Party theoretician from Italy, he said a long march to the institutions. You can't put people in the United States. You can't put them in concentration camps and shit, but you can take over institutions. Just look at corporate America and just how leftist they are. They're using what's left of our free market system to make a profit, but they embrace every left-wing cause. Practically most big corporations do. Look at your schools, look at your media, look at Hollywood. Right? Look at the type of things they're promoting.
Sure.
So they capture the institutions, but not completely, but to a large extent.
To a large extent. No, you're right.
That's why a lot of people that would be in Tea Party movements, they're afraid to take on certain issues because they're afraid of the influence around here to be the Boston Globe. Although thankfully the newsprint's dying out, they still have a lot of influence plus online. So they're so afraid of being considered extreme, so they go out of the way to avoid certain things.
That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. Let's get into Article 5 here. And this is huge. This is and until I met you last year and started getting involved I'm not sure if it was you. Somebody sent me a subscription. Was that you?
It was
you. Thank you very much. So I started reading that. I started learning more about Article 5. You came here and you gave a talk a while ago. That was just more enlightenment as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, the Article 5 Constitution Convention is growing across its nation. Mark Levine, he's even written a book on this. But I want to read from in here, the July 9th edition from the New American Vaccine, put out by the John Birch Society.
Yeah, I know a reprint of that.
There you go.
Camera lady's going to zoom in on it.
Yeah, that is very good. So anyway, here we are right here. Once Congress convenes a convention, it cannot be undone. No predetermined rules or limitation adopted by either Congress or the states will have any bearing on what the convention delegates may choose to do or propose. Convention delegates would have free latitude to propose any changes they see fit, including the writing of an entirely new constitution along with changes to the mode of ratification. The left is publicly calling for what they call a runaway convention. And I want you to, these are dangerous. This is a dangerous thing, isn't it?
Very much so. And, well, let me just, for the sake of those who might not know what an Article 5 is, the U.S. Constitution, Article 5, gives us two ways to amend the Constitution. The first way is the only way that has been ever used. 2/3 of the House and Senate propose an amendment, then it goes to the states. You need 3/4 of the states to ratify it, and as of late, usually 7-year period. I think when it came to the election of the 18-year-old voters, I think the states had 7 years to do so. Although there's still a few amendments that are out there in constitutional cyberspace or cyberland, that have not. In fact, the 27th Amendment that deals with pay raises, that would have been the first amendment had it been ratified back in 1791. So,
really?
Yeah. So the second way that has never been used is for the states to apply for pass resolutions or applications to have a convention where amendments will be proposed. And if you read Article 5, they use the term, it's in the plural, amendments. So you can't limit it to one thing. A resolution may have one item coming from a state, balanced budget, flag, whatever, flag burning, English is the official language, numerous others, but a call is a call. And so there are some folks that believe that you can simply limit it to one thing or a couple of things. In fact, Lou Euler, a long-time Article 5 proposer, he's now calling it a balanced budget amendment convention, which is sort of absurd because it's a convention. We use the word constitutional convention. That was the word that has been used up until the last couple of years when this group called Convention of the States was formed by Mark Meckler.
Yes.
Mark Meckler was involved in the National Tea Party Patriots. I think it may have been used just to confuse people. But when we say Constitutional Convention, we're talking about Article 5. And they'll say, well, it's not a Constitutional Convention, it's an amendments convention. But you simply say, well, can an amendment radically alter the Constitution? And the answer, of course, is yes. So we'll call it a Constitutional Convention, because you're not talking about anything but the U.S. Constitution there. You're not talking about some other document.
And one of the things you covered when you were giving your talk here, and from what I've been learning myself, just by educating myself on this, is when the Articles of Confederation, when that was going to be, they wanted to fix it to begin with, but what they ended up doing was they ended up throwing the whole thing out and creating the Constitution. That's a distinct possibility that could happen here with Article 5. Never mind just making a simple amendment. They could say, you know what, throw the Constitution out and start all over again. Now that's where the danger is, isn't it?
You have, yes, and there's a lot of folks out there that think, everyone must think like I do, and they would never do anything unreasonable. But if you read some of these articles that they're promoting it. There was an article in the Atlantic online public in mid-December of 2013, and it said that nobody obeys the Constitution anymore. It's outdated. It's time for a refresher course. Or time for a new one. There was a professor out of A&M, Meg Penrose.
Yes. And let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Penrose said the gun violence required drastic measures. He quotes, again, quote, there is not a single amendment that is absolute. No constitutional right is sacred. It's time today in our message to repeal and replace the Second Amendment. I'm in favor of redrafting the entire Constitution.
That's right. And that attitude is shared by many people, even those on the so-called conservative side. And I'll give you an example. Mr. Mike Ferris of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, who's one of the leading proponents. Now, he's not, the homeschool group is not necessarily endorsing it. You know, he's kind of stepped aside. He's advocating a 50-member Supreme Court that will be chosen by states for 6-year terms. One 6-year term. 50 Supreme Court justices. Now, that's what I think. You know, and the thing is, he's got a lot of credibility, and it's justified. You know, he leads this great homeschool group. He's testified against UN treaties. He's written books. He started a college, a very conservative.
So you think he will be on our side? But that's
you don't think so? And I just don't understand what. Like some people just have a blind side, and he's very adamant about this. Mark Levin, who wrote a book called Liberty Amendments, and if you read it, there's one amendment that I like. It's to repeal the 17th. That's the direct election of senators.
Yes.
But not through an Article 5 convention. The other ones tend to be populist, and that will really add a real restructure of the Constitution. One of them, and I'm not getting it, 100% verbatim here, but he's looking at any time there's an unbalanced budget, the states have to approve so many percentage of the states. Well, that really upset the whole balance of power here. And a lot of these people, and I agree with these folks for the reason why they want one, not for the call itself. They look at runaway federal government. They're absolutely right. And the way to address that isn't through an Article 5. They think for some reason if you get some amendments that cannot be misconstrued, that's one of their talking points. If you go to their website, frequently asked questions, we're going to write an amendment that can't be misinterpreted. Well, boy, they're misinterpreting most of the Constitution. Right. So how are they going to do anything different? What kind of English language magic are they going to employ that makes sure it won't happen? But even, let's just say that we hold a convention and everything positive comes out of this, that the left-wing part, they'll be totally neutralized. Now this would be a miraculous thing. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that an amendment is passed to give us a balanced budget. And maybe a couple of other things that will attempt to rein in Congress. It will take 7 years for states to do this, right? At least 7 years.
Sure.
So this convention is held within the next couple of years, and then you have another 5 to 7 years before anything could be implemented. That's a long time. So you're looking at
it's almost fruitless.
So you're looking at it. They're telling us this is the last hope we have. Everything is just impossible. Forget about elections. We have to have this. And then we're going to wait another, 3 to 4 election cycles
before it actually
Congress. See, people in Massachusetts, we elect our members of Congress, and every other every other state does the same thing. Those folks are supposed to work for us. So they say that we're not. So the same folks who sent the people down to Washington are the same folks that send people to the state houses.
Sure.
And they're of the opinion, these folks that support one on the conservative side, that the states will do the right thing. Well, we look at this, the state governments are really just a minor leagues for the federal government.
That's no better in our, especially Massachusetts.
Right.
Our
There may be some states that get their house in order, but there aren't a whole lot. And one of their talking points, they say, we have nothing to worry about because you still need 3/4 of the states to ratify anything that comes out of this convention, which is true, unless they change the mode of ratification. In the Article 5, Congress can change the mode. So Congress can say, well, we don't know if there'll be enough state legislators, so we'll make sure that we'll use ratifying. They use the word amendments convention. So states, they'll have state ratifying conventions. So you may just have a couple of dozen. And that's how the U.S. Constitution was adopted, through ratifying conventions, not by state legislators. So these state legislators will think, well, if anything comes out of this, we'll be able to say no. You may not. And there's a possibility that this sovereign deliberative body, once it convenes, they can, whatever the instructions they got from the state, they can toss it out the window, because that's what the precedent was the first one. And I need to address that too. So they could say, we'll just need a simple majority. They could do that. And maybe within 2 years or whatever to ratify these things. The Article 5 supporters, the Convention of the States especially, they tell us that only 2 states gave specific instructions when it came to revising the articles. And that was what revising. But that's not true. It's probably never a fact. There are 12 states passed resolutions. Rhode Island did not. 8 states gave one restriction, and that is to have a majority. Use the word several states. Several states means all the states. Today we hear that word, we're thinking 3 states, but it meant all states. So when they wrote the Constitution, we're, by the way, very glad they gave us what we did. It's an incredible document that it has nothing to do with the time with Frank Grant. It dealt with human nature.
I'm currently reading Skousen's 5,000-Year League. Absolutely. And he's spot on. Everything he's talking about in that book is absolutely true. And it's a theory that I've held pretty much most of my life that, I mean, the creation of the Constitution is not only revolutionary of its time. I always use the term that it's evolutionary. It's nothing like that had ever happened before. And nothing like that has ever happened since.
That's right. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned Cleon Skousen. He was in his late 90s when he passed away.
Right.
I got to hear him speak in New Hampshire before he passed away.
He started like a class in like a garage.
In a garage.
At the back of his house. I don't even think it was his house. It was like a neighbor's house or something like that.
He was the founder of the National Center for Constitutional Studies.
Yeah.
He had a law degree. He was a police chief and FBI agent. The guy was an incredible man. He was initially in favor of Article 5 Convention.
Right.
1994, he writes a letter to Phyllis Schlafly at Eagle Forum, and I have a copy of the letter which I just found recently. It's actually on eagleforum.org website. And he and Phyllis Schlafly shared the stage many times. They were very good friends. So many other issues, and he said there's only one thing we ever disagreed with, and that was our position on Article 5. He didn't call her names. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of bad blood between people who are supporting Article 5 that supposedly don't, you're evil, and Mike Farris has called us evil and enemies of the Constitution, and I've been called more vile names, I think, the last couple of months by some of these convention of states. Boy, I'm a pretty nice guy. I mean, which I could repeat.
Yeah, John Birch, I think, have been tagged the R word, the racist term.
That word's always good. That's always the default, if nothing else, from that one up. So
let's move on through here now.
Anyway, I want to mention again. Cleon Skousen said in the letter, he said that I was wrong and you were right. He said he was right on the abstract principles. He said, but you were right because of the moral degeneracy.
That's in the book.
Yeah.
It's in the edition I have. There's a couple of prefaces and forwards written by various.
So you don't want to have. That was 1994. I wish to say things are better. 20 years later or so, but they're not.
No, if anything, things are worse now. In fact, let's move on with that. We live in a time when almost 60% of the, this is from Lawrence Lessig, founder of Call Convention. We live in a time when almost 60% of the American public cannot even identify the Bill of Rights. In fact, isn't that part of the problem? We don't teach civics in schools anymore. We don't teach American government anymore. Common Core, you've been following Dr. Sylvester. I've been writing about that and doing more research on it alongside the Article 5 stuff. To be it's a likely scenario that we risk in generations to come, that they're just going to be ignorant of the importance of the Constitution. Never mind what Lessig says here about 60% of the American public, but this is possibly why they're able to push this Article 5. It's like because people don't know about the Constitution, and generation with Common Core, then children are never going to know about it. So it's going to be easy for these people to just go ahead and...
That's right. Well, let me say this. The last 4 or 5 years, I think, has seen a rebirth of interest in the Constitution. If you call that National Center for Constitutional Studies and you want to order 1,000 constitutions, sometimes it will take a week or so to get them because of the backlog of orders.
Really?
So there's a lot of interest. 5,000-year leap. They do seminars all over the country. The John Birch studies came out with a great six DVD set of the Constitution as a Solution to teach people about the Constitution. And there's, of course, Hillsdale College, I think, does a free online. So there's a lot of interest, and there's a big homeschool movement. And many of those homeschoolers have a keener appreciation of the Constitution.
I had Catherine White here too from Constitution. Yeah, she's been on the show. She's coming back later on, probably in the fall too. She does her seminar. She has it, I think, once a month or
I think in Concord or Lexington.
Yeah, on that area. Right. And she's amazing. She's an amazing.
So Lessig may be right. You say about the 60%. In fact, we do information tables at fairs and other venues, and we ask people. We have a petition going to a member of Congress, who's your congressman, a woman, and at the Cheshire Fair near Keene, New Hampshire. We've been doing it the last 5 or 6 years, and my son will tell me, he said, only about 5%. That may not be a scientific. 5% of the people that are there that sympathize with whatever issue we have don't know the member of Congress. I spoke to a high school, elementary school, public school, 56 graders in Connecticut just a little while ago, and a lot of teachers were there. And I said, can anyone in this room name their member of Congress? One teacher out of maybe 20 knew. So here we are, the most important, that congressman works for us, a woman, and the guest gets as a congressman, and they don't even know that person is. Amazing. So, and then these same people say, we have to have a convention, we got to restore the balance of power. You don't even know what's going on in your own congressional district. So we do have to restore the balance of power, and that's not done through a convention. It's done by telling the state government, telling the federal government, get your money out of here.
Right.
We don't want your HUD grants. We don't want your Pell grants. We don't want your highway money. But so many states are just relying upon that federal money.
And that's what
we don't want your Common Core money.
That's what I was just going to say. Right.
And
they dangle it from it.
Let me point out this irony, hypocrisy, or apparent hypocrisy. The National Governors Association, which holds in part the patent for Common Core, is supporting an Article 5 convention. Because we have to restore the balance of power. Well, what's wrong with that picture? So on one hand, they're saying, we need to restore the balance. On the other hand, they're getting money from the federal government. They're frauds. It's a fraud.
Exactly.
So
it is so blatant. Here's the thing that in my blog that I wrote about is that it's purposeful. I was talking to Colonel Reed Reeser. He was running for Senate out in Texas on the show, and he even said that it's purposeful. Everything is purposeful that they're doing. They know they're doing it.
They know what they're doing. You see, one of the things that why the Birch Society has drawn so much criticism is because we dare say that things are happening by design.
Right.
It's not just misguided ideology. Not to say there isn't some misguided ideology, but Common Core, they know exactly what they're doing. Sure. The NAFTA, they knew it was going to destroy our economy. Right. These undeclared UN wars.
Brings us back to what you said about corporations adopting the leftist ideology. They knew.
That's right. Now, this article we did, working together for Article 5 convention, to rewrite the Constitution, sorry. I was at that conference in September of 2011 at Harvard University. This was where the modern day movement got launched. And it was billed as a place where both sides of the issue will be discussed. Nice little place we get together, sing kumbaya, and walk out of there holding hands. Well, 2 months prior to the event, I tried to become a panelist, or someone from my organization, or be or whoever, you know. They never got back to me, so it looks like they didn't want everybody there. In the Birch Society, if you go to their websites, of all the pro Article 5 people were mentioned there, quite a lot, I mean, almost exclusively. So you think one of the most critical opponents of an Article 5 that's been instrumental in preventing one should be allowed to speak because of that. So we weren't, but we got media credentials to New American Magazine. We couldn't take any pictures inside or do any video footage inside as well. But we got some, I had a colleague of mine, Tom Edel, who spent Saturday there. He interviewed Mark McElroy, who at that time was head of the National Tea Party Patriots, and he co-sponsored the event.
Right.
Now, when an organization takes a task like that on, it's a lot of financial, expensive deal. And it looked like he came out of there not really certain. Well, I'll tell you what, if I was to commit bio funds, you know, the funds are hard to come by. I don't know what it cost, but I'm sure it was at least 5 digits, if not more.
Exactly.
I would think we would have an idea, one way or the other. So, at that event, there were people on both sides of the spectrum. And there was only 2 people there, to my knowledge, that spoke out against it. One was Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard, who's a very left-wing professor. You know, we say a stop clock is right twice a day. Maybe with his case, only one time a day. He's always opposed, and of course, Convention of States is saying that he's somehow on our payroll, you know, but that's not the case. In fact, he probably has as much contempt for the John Birch Society as the Convention of States has for us, if not more. But also there was a group called the Coffee Party, Common Cause, which was set up by the Rockefeller in the early 70s as a grassroots advocacy group. But when the Rockefeller money comes in from the foundation, that's a grassroots, not the Cato.
Yeah, it was Concord, not Concord, Cause is a well-known name.
You better believe it, that is. You had a group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, so perhaps from that group. And ALEC is another one of these apparently conservative entities of state reps from around the country belong to it. And they have a sort of agenda that they hope state reps will introduce. And a few times they've done some good things over the years. But lately they've been embracing Obama's transatlantic partnerships and trans-Pacific partnerships. And if you go to ALEC, go to their website, look at the corporate sponsors, Bank of America, and all these other big, huge corporations. Not exactly a grassroots organization. Larry Lessig was the host, the co-sponsor. He created Move to Amend, and also a man named, I always have trouble with the name, I think it's Cenk Berger, C-E-N-K.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I was at that
It's
event.
Berger, or it's
Yes.
not Uyghur, or, I have no idea. I never watched the Young Turks. Yeah.
Well, I was actually at that event.
Yeah, Wolfpack he does, right.
Well, Cenk is interviewing Larry Lessig, and I'm actually behind him, videotaping.
Oh, really?
And when I taped it, and I did interview Larry. I asked him one question. He was very cordial. I asked him, could this convention change the number or the percentage of ratification? He said no, it couldn't. But the conversation he had with Cenk was that Cenk was saying that he's saying that the first one we had under the articles is a runaway, and Larry said, yes, let's say we need another runaway. So they're sort of admitting. Now, I don't use the term runaway in the sense where there would be a lot of people showing up with all kinds of crazy ideas and amendments, and what was initially the purpose will be totally hijacked. It's a planned runaway.
Sure.
You know, it's the bait and switch. And what they're doing, they're very clever. They're going to people, well, you don't like your congressman, let's have term limits. Oh, term limits is great. How are we going to do that? Through an Article 5 convention. Term limits is okay at the ballot box. But when you term limit a politician, it's also restricting the voters.
Sure, of course.
And there might be some rascals that we need to get rid of, but you're going to get rid of some of the folks that maybe should be there.
Right.
And also, this notion, well, we got a rascal in Congress right now, but he should be gone in 6 years. We got nothing to worry about. So we have this sense of permanent lame duck Congress. There's nothing worse than a lame anything. Anything. That's how we passed GATT through a lame duck Congress. Or the WTO. So lame duck Congress you don't want. A sense of complacency. And you might replace socialist A with socialist B because you have not changed the philosophy and the understanding in that congressional district.
Certainly.
I mean, you get rid of John Kerry when he became a Secretary of State, who replaced him in our state.
Oh, yeah, Markey and
Markey's
Hiawatha Warren and Markey.
Yeah, so we did.
There was absolutely, when all of that went down, I said, people said, well, but has a chance, he has a chance. I said, well, that's not going to happen. Massachusetts is an all-Democrat state. It's a well-oiled machine. And no one's paying attention to her Harvard record, lying to get in there. No one's paying attention to her daughter doing that thing with the welfare people. Nobody's going to say anything. So even though we covered it, and you know about it, and your wife knows about it, and like-minded people of on our side know about it, it didn't matter in the Philippines, and that was my position. And people thought I was crazy. I said, you mark my words, you watch. And sure enough, as the time went on, they all got swept under the rug, and here we are.
So it isn't that term limits won't be, there's no quick fix. We have to get a certain percentage of the voters to understand why the need for limited government is the way to go. And until we do that, and we've done it in many districts. In Massachusetts, it's pretty much a battle, but it's not impossible. And so, and as I said earlier, sure, we put all our baskets, all our eggs in the Article 5 basket. And even at the best case scenario, even if it doesn't rewrite the Constitution, it will take maybe 8 to 10 years before any of these amendments that will have to bear fruit. And let's get back to the idea of a balanced budget amendment. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it, for a fiscal conservative? So does that say we won't raise taxes? Does it limit the size of government? I don't think so. The amendments I've seen even had escape clauses in case of national emergency. And what's a national emergency? Whatever the president says it is.
Exactly. Whatever he wants.
So what we need is a constitutional budget. We need to abolish many of the federal entities. And if you get this amendment passed, and the various coast of the states, and the states will start the state legislature, as they do vote on it, or the ratifying committees will say, wait a minute now, how much do we get from the federal government every year? In some cases, 35% of the budget, the state budgets, is federal money. How quickly are they going to vote against that federal interest? Now we got to go out and either cut the size of state government, or we have to go raise the taxes, or sell some of our assets off to get that difference. And we'd like to see that happen. But it won't happen through an Article 5 convention.
When I read Joe Goldberg's book, Liberal Fascism, one of the things I took away from his writing is that socialists and socialism is a very selfish form of government. Everything is controlled by the state. The socialists will offer all sorts of solutions to problems to get the public on board. Yet will do nothing to actually solve those problems. And I think Uyghur here, Uyghur, you're right, I can't pronounce his name either. This guy is obviously an incredible socialist here, and what he says is restore true representative democracy in the United States by pressuring our state representatives to pass a much-needed 28th Amendment in our Constitution, which would end corporate personhood and publicly finance all elections in our country. And I just want to read what their official position is here. Corporations are not people. They have none of the constitutional rights of human beings. Corporations are not allowed to give money to any politician directly or indirectly, and no politician can raise over $100 from any person or entity. All elections must be publicly financed. Now, I'm of two minds on the Supreme Court decision considering Citizens United, and corporations are not individuals. I agree with that. However, they do have a certain status because of who they are, and they have a separate status as far as representation is concerned. However, Wolfpack wants to deny companies from having any say in the political process. So what is to stop a future organization like Wolfpack from not only stopping companies and corporations from having representation, but maybe having a joint Birch society not being represented, or me, or you?
We are incorporated under Massachusetts general law. In our state, if you raise more than $250 towards a candidate, you have to incorporate. So it's going to change a whole lot of laws, and it sounds appealing. These faceless corporations, Citizens United, they made a documentary about Hillary Clinton. That's what they were against. Wolfpack is a political pack set up for one reason only, for Article 5 convention. its parent is Young Turks. Young Turks is
Isn't that a corporation? Isn't that?
Well, the difference is it's media. And George Soros is the funder of Young Turks.
I know.
Why would Soros, who dumps tons of money into the political realm,
Certainly.
and through his various entities, media consortium?
But this is what I'm saying about socialism being selfish. It's okay for them.
Right.
It's just not okay for you.
But that would be the corporate media. Right. The corporate media would have unlimited time where the conservative voice is not as loud. That's why they have to form groups like Citizens United and make documentaries. And also the federal, taxpayer support of elections. That means the governments, the state and federal government, will determine what a viable candidate is. That's how dangerous that is. So you want to run for office, you have to jump over all these hoops. You're not a viable candidate. Now, there was a man that just won down in Virginia, the primary.
Certainly.
He was not, no doubt, he probably would not have met the description of a viable candidate under any potential law.
Certainly.
How many people have get elected? It also discourages a lot of people from even trying to get elected.
Certainly.
Because some states have these they call not free elections, but clean elections, where they have to get so many donations, a $5 donation from 100 people before they can even operate. And it's just more restrictions.
In fact,
Actually, it will give the establishment a monopoly. And here's this Cenk Uygur coming across like some kind of populist. He's being sponsored by one of the top insiders in the world. That's so hypocritical.
It is. It's really hypocritical. One of the things, you mentioned earlier about being on the Meat and Potato Show. One of the things that I've done since 2008, I've done this for years, is I do my candidate interview series during the entire election process. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing some of the most interesting, intelligent people, and they all know this, who didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning.
Right.
But I purposely interviewed them and purposely sought them out because nobody else would talk to them. Nobody else. I've even interviewed LaRouche Democrats. Why? Because when I go to try to get other Democrats to come onto the show, they won't come on the show. But the LaRouche people will come on. So you're damn sure I'm going to have them on the show. If they're going to answer my invite, of course they are. Mark Callahan out in Oregon, he was featured on Fox News. He's the guy that was thrown out of the Willamette Weekly interview. That went viral all over the web. He's been on my show several times. Colonel Reeser down in Texas, he's been on my show. Jason Ravnsborg in South Dakota has been on the show, and that's just this year alone. None of these people, even in their own states, people are like, who are these people? But because I interview them, I put them on the video, and I make it viral. It's like, oh, check this video out. Next thing you know, they're getting some traction. But that brings me back to what you just said about
party was a third party, wasn't it?
Exactly. But brings me back to what you said about who determines who a viable candidate is. Every single one of these people that I've interviewed all the way back to 2008 have had the same problem. Is that they can't get money from the Republican Party because the Republican Party has already picked their favorite child.
That's right.
It's unbelievable.
That's right.
Let's, again, from the magazine here, even if you support having a Senate in addition to the House of Representatives, do you support as well giving Wyoming the same number of votes as California, which has roughly 7 times the population? And that's from Sanford Levinson there.
That's the populist notion that they want to do away with electoral college. That's another big threat. You see, the states created the federal government. At the convention in 1789, there was a big issue between large states and small states, and I think it was called the New Jersey Plan, where the small states said, we'll have no say in this national government if we don't have, what's the safeguard here? We will be voted down every single time because we're just going to send a couple of delegates to the legislature where the big populated states will have a lot more say.
Certainly, but
so the argument was, well, tell you what, we'll make a compromise. We'll have 2 senators from each state. There will always be 2. And then the Congress, the House of Representatives, will be based on population. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but the state legislators chose the members of Congress, the members of the Senate. And it worked out pretty well. The Electoral College, simply each state has so many votes. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it should be. So it's based on the member of congressional delegation. Exactly. In some states, the minimum would be 3. And I think it works very well for us. And so I don't think we should change it.
No.
But these folks want to turn this whole notion, and they want to give us almost this socialist democracy, so that's what they're pushing.
Exactly. And speaking of that word democracy, it's mentioned all these people. I don't mean the authors and the magazines, but everybody that they're using. They keep using that term over and over again. American democracy. We want to save the democracy. Folks, we're not a democracy.
They can't even define.
They can't.
Exactly. Now, if you go to, I recommend the viewers to go to a website called conconcon.org.
Right.
This is the website that has all the information that happened in September 2011 in Harvard, as the various workshops, the lectures, and they say democracy is stalled. To me, that's a good thing, because we're a republic.
That's supposed to be a
And a republic is ruled by law, where the whims of the majority cannot infringe upon the minority. When I say minority, I'm speaking not necessarily of a particular group of people, a racial minority, but minority in general. So our founding fathers are very, very clear on republics and democracies. James Madison, Federalist Papers number 10, said that democracies have everywhere been spectacles of turbulence and contention, short in their lives and violent in their deaths.
And I've said that socialism has the longest history of having the shortest history in history. It's always been around, but it's only been around for a short time.
That's right. That's right. And so what we need to do is we need to help. Our job is to create informed voters. And you don't need every single person to be informed. You just have enough to make a difference in election. And to give you an example, each congressional district has about 650,000 citizens, give or take. Out of that figure, half of them are eligible to vote. So now we're about 325,000. Out of that figure, half of them may turn out for election. And out of that number, 10%, 5% make a difference. So if we focus on informing those people, we do it through, in our magazine we have something called the Freedom Index, where you can look at your member of Congress and how he or she votes, both the Senate and the House. And it's surprising if you think, well, gee, this person's a real conservative, you look at the voting record. Like Scott Brown, for example.
Might tell a different story.
Scott Brown voted with John Kerry most of the time.
Sure.
With one of few. So John Kerry would get a 20 on an index of 0 to 100. And Scott Brown gets a 40. Well, if I came home from school with a 40 on my test, no, my mother wasn't going to be very happy.
Exactly, right.
Well, but little Johnny only got a 20. Well, I don't care what Johnny got. You better go back and learn. So our job is to create that informed electorate, and when we do that, we will see real change under the Constitution. Now, right now, we are probably about 10 to 11 states away from an Article 5 convention. So here it is, June of 2014. We were able to beat back some calls. Some of them were that we won surprisingly. In Virginia, for example, Utah. Virginia is the headquarters of the Convention of the States. In Arizona, it's the headquarters of the Goldwater Institute. We were able to beat it back in these two states. We were able to rescind from about late 1990s to 2010. Our members, not exclusively, but primarily, were able to rescind calls for Article 5 conventions in about 17 states. I'm talking about all the calls. And there's some calls that go back to 1789, and we are concerned that these old calls may be used as legitimate new calls, or legitimate, still viable. And if we hadn't done that, we may have already hit Article 5. We may have been that close. But a number of states have since passed new calls. And, for example, Vermont passed a fresh call. That was actually the left-wing version of the call, the Wolfpack call. We beat back the call in New Hampshire, the Wolfpack call, but they have a live call for a balanced budget in 2012. So right now, 21 to 23 states. Some people say, maybe call is valid, therefore we should have one ready. Now, April of 2014, there was something called the Congressional Research Service. There was a 26-page report. It was very unbiased. It just said, what's the situation here? And they say that Congress may not recognize any calls over 7 years of age, 7 years old. They may not recognize any call that isn't identical, even if it's calling for like a balanced budget amendment, but its wording is different. We don't know that. See, it's pure speculation. Congress can say, we're calling right now. Congress may say, no, we're not satisfied by these calls. But regardless of that, our job is to get all of the old calls rescinded here in Massachusetts, and we're looking for, in all states, looking for those who will sponsor a resolution to rescind our calls, because you know, as soon as the new session sits next January, there's going to be a bunch of calls for an Article 5. Now, this group, these are very well-funded people. The Article 5 Convention, Convention of the States, the ALEC, the Goldwater Institute, and on the left, you've got Move to Amend, the Wolfpack. They're getting a lot of money to do this. They hire staff people. We're an organization. I cover 6 states as a full-time staff member. So we rely on, of course, primarily on our volunteers. And we've been able to do a whole lot. I mean, when you go to their websites and those who promote one, we're public enemy #1.
Exactly, you're definitely good. Yeah, you've been something like that. In the article that said something about 40 plus years you guys have been practically fighting. Just this issue.
We got involved in this in the 83, 84. Phil Schlafly's could be before him, kind of predated us. And I think there was a lot of people advocating amendments, not that they wanted an Article 5, but they thought it'd scare Congress into action. Well, it's like playing Russian roulette. In fact, back in the 70s, after the Roe versus Wade, that repealed all the states' laws against abortion, there was some pro-life folks said, it's worth the risk. Let's see if we can have an Article 5 to repeal Roe versus Wade. And they got a number of states, about 20 states, and it was by 82 or 83, I think they realized that they're not going to get any more states. They definitely don't have 3/4 of 38 states. So they decided not to go that route anymore. Again, I know there's a lot of people out there. They're enamored by these talk show hosts. You've got guys like Glenn Beck, guys like Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, and then they hear us.
But these guys aren't qualified to call for something like that. And they want to go.
Well, this was interesting.
Just like this Uyghur here, he's spearheading it. He's not qualified.
This is what, if you're a legal scholar that happens to support one, you are esteemed. But if you're not, your credentials are questioned. I'll give you an example. Charles Rice, professor, former professor, dean of Notre Dame Law School. He came out against it. And he wrote about why he opposes it. And one of the Convention of States supporters said, what are his credentials? Well, what has he written on Article 5? Well, let's look at Mike Farris. Mike Farris, his specialty is homeschool and family law. Nothing, that's good stuff. But he's no more an expert in Article 5 than the real estate agent, Mark Mettler, who was a Russian real estate attorney. And that's his specialty. And that's a complicated law. And my hat's off to people who have studied that. But it doesn't make him an expert. But what makes him an expert is because he was an Article 5 convention, therefore he's an expert.
Unbelievable. Let's move on here. Common Core, absolutely fantastic tour with Dr. Pesca.
Yes, right.
How many cities did you guys end up hitting in this area?
Well, now we're talking about June 7th. We did North Reading, Massachusetts, Quincy, Massachusetts, Keene, New Hampshire, Hollis, New Hampshire, Wyndham, New Hampshire, Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Then we went out, and I think we got them all. Plus, we got some radio, live in-studio radio.
Yeah, I shared, you did a thing in your living room, I think it was, with
Oh, that was in my living room. I wish my living room had that nice, it was nice looking as that one. Yeah, what we did was, Common Core, as we discussed a lot with Agenda 21, Common Core and Agenda 20 were sort of tandem.
Exactly.
And, but as I mentioned earlier.
Yes, educate my audience on this.
Well, Common Core is something, was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the goal is a total takeover of education, federal education, formal takeover. And it was being promoted by the Department of Education, federal level. And this race to the top, the Obama was passed by the Obama administration. They said to the states, you take Common Core, we'll give you this money.
Right.
But you have to take it.
You have to take
46 states took it. And that's just another example. People will say that, the supporters of Article 5 will say that states will never do anything unreasonable. Well, at least not 38 states. You still have that 11.
46 took Common Core money.
46 took the Common Core money. Every state has been implementing some aspect of Agenda 21. It's only been recently that there's been some pushback, and several states have passed resolutions or laws to say, get it out, and it's not completely out of these states.
Well, here's the thing too about Common Core. It's 1965, I think it's 1970, and
well, 65
79.
was Johnson, with Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society programs that.
What these three separate laws are is that the federal government cannot intervene in the local curriculum. But this is what Common Core is doing.
Well, what they did is that we didn't write it, well, look who's copywritten it.
I know, that's the shell game.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's a wicked shell game.
I mean, if I contracted you to do a certain service, and they said, gee, I don't care for that, that he had nothing, he had nothing to do with it. I just paid him to write it. Well, it's still appropriate. It's still your program.
Slid that in there.
And on both sides, I've seen people on both sides of the spectrum. And and like the Article 5, there's always been people on the left-hand side against it as well as the right-hand side. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're working together, we're compromising our views. In the history of the Article 5 movement, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, you had the ACLU proposing the Article 5 convention. You had the NEA, the NRA, the American Legion, and many others. In fact, I brought this just an illustration. I'm not going to read it to you, because it'll take me a little while. But this is a 1,300 plus page report from a 1979 hearing in the U.S. Senate. See, the U.S. Senate thinks that they have they're supposed to be able to control an Article 5 convention. There are no laws, no rules, anything right now guiding them at all. We've never had one. Some of these supporters say that, well, we'll set the ground rules before we go in. In fact, just in Indianapolis, Indiana, they have about 100 legislators from about 33 different states. They're mostly conservative types. Well, we're going to work on some ground rules. Well, that's all well and good. The minute they convene, they can take those rules and say it's granted. They can take that state resolution and say, if you don't do this, we're going to put you in jail. So what? Put me in jail. Well, appeal that to the 50-member Supreme Court that we're going to vote. So, and if I'm going to rewrite the Constitution, I'll be happy to take a 6-month suspended sentence. If I'm going to, so that's a waste. That's totally useless. So anyway, Orrin Hatch was the one that presided over this. He was very much in favor, as he still is. And nothing was ever passed. But boy, there's a lot of great stuff. In fact, this particular document, it's in the Worcester Library. Not too many places have it. It's in my library, but it also was out of print, but I was able to put it online. I was able to have a good friend of mine that scanned it into its printer, yeah. And you will see people, professors from both sides of the spectrum that appeared as hearings. They said, bar the door, don't have a convention. And they used honestly, we're fair and whatever. And in fact, the NAACP passed a resolution, and copy that's in here. So, in fact, if viewers are watching, you can probably look my contact information.
Certainly. Yeah.
I have it on, I have a script.com page, and you find it on there if they're interested in just, but some of these supporters of Article 5, like Mark Meckler, he wrote an article back late last year, 2014, and he said the only people that have opposed this were fringe groups and so forth. Back in the 70s, well, whatever a fringe group is. Sometimes he used the term well-funded fringe group. Yeah. But there were a lot of people that had a lot of say about Article 5. We probably never knew this existed. And you find this information mostly in law journals. Most people don't read law journals. Even most lawyers probably don't read law journals. So that's why it's important.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is amazing. How about the claim that the Supreme Court has the final say regarding the constitutionality of federal laws or edicts? Thomas Jefferson had something to say about that matter. In 1804, he wrote that giving the Supreme Court power to declare unconstitutional acts of the legislature or executive, quote, would make the judiciary a despotic branch. He noted that nothing in the Constitution gives the Supreme Court that right. Now, there's nothing that gives Obamacare or even Common Core.
That's right.
There's nothing in the Constitution. Yet, the Supreme Court may go ahead and think about what they did with they called it not a fine, it is a tax. Never mind the fact that it came out of the Senate first.
And by the way, Republican, Roberts, a Republican conservative, said if they overturned it and threw it out. But
all they're doing is breaking laws up there in Washington.
The Supreme
That's
Court,
all they're doing.
The Supreme Court, and this is one of the arguments too, of Article 5 supporters, the Supreme Court's run away and so forth. The only way to rein them in is through an Article 5. Well, no, that's not the case. A Supreme Court justice can be impeached. It's only happened once, and that person back in 1801 or 1802, and he was not removed, but he was impeached. But we've never had an Article 5. It's a whole lot easier to impeach. We sit back on good behavior. So they sit there for, as long as they're behaving properly. And that's sort of what does that mean? Well, if they're coming across these crazy decisions, then that's not good behavior. But also, Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution says that Congress can limit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. They've done that a few times. They did that with labor laws. So a labor law will not go to the Supreme Court. So you don't have to have an Article 5 convention or even impeach a Supreme Court justice. You can just make sure that they cannot hear anything that comes out of this particular law.
Interesting.
And it's something that's there, and all you need is a majority of both House and Senate. So a majority of those present.
Yeah.
So if you have 50% of 51, 50% of 51, you know, in the Senate, for example. So that's the remedy. They're not using that. And they're not using that remedy.
I was at the city council meeting twice. They were discussing
Worcester, Massachusetts.
in Worcester, yeah, city council in Worcester. Twice I watched them, and it's on film, it's on my YouTube channel. They quite literally were talking about, well, the NDAA isn't our responsibility. It's not our job to not support it. Never mind the fact that the group that was there, Rutland, Oxford, how's the other town? There's another town out there. Charlton, I think it was, that their town, their city councils had said, no, we're not going to uphold NDAA. We don't want this in our town. We're not going to
You're getting notifications when you're done, right?
We're talking about notifications.
Another very important aspect. The states created the federal government. The 10th Amendment basically says that...
thank you for segueing.
Well, that's okay.
He knows where I was going.
Yeah, the 10th Amendment says that there's certain things that certain powers not granted to the state, not denied to the states,
right,
or granted to the federal government, or left up to the states.
And to the people themselves.
Or into the people. So that's and nullification has been used, and when you use that term, guys like Mark Levin will say, you're a neo-Confederate if you believe in nullification. Well,
nullification is very important.
States nullified the Slavery Act, the Fugitive Slave Act, that predated the Civil War. The Real ID Act that Congress passed back in 08, 07, 06, somewhere around there. They said that every state had to comply with these, basically, national ID cards, or the driver's license. New Hampshire was the first state to say, we're not, hell no, we won't go. And I don't know, there's been about 20 other states that took that route. So what did Congress say? Well, we'll give you a few more years. And it's been a few more years. Some states have complied, others have not, and they haven't molested those states. So yes, we have no other remedy. If members of Congress are going to vote the wrong way and impose tyranny, the states certainly have to do that.
Certainly, right.
You don't have to wait for an Article 5 convention that will probably take 2 years to be held and maybe 6 to 10 years before anything
Everyone's right.
Meanwhile, we get spy cameras, we get taxes, we have undeclared wars, we have an runaway Congress, we have a declared debt of 17 to 18 trillion.
Yeah.
You know, but we have elections every 2 years. You see. And that's,
you can vote them out.
and you can vote them out. You know, well, you've got to keep the work. Well, you've got to keep trying. And it does work. Could you imagine if we didn't have elections every 2 years? We'd already be in total tyranny.
Well, the other thing, too, is our country has morally just gone completely off the rails. Getting back to Scout's book and the things that he talks about the importance of having, I'm going to use the word religion, and I know people, they freak out about that.
Well, they shouldn't freak out because if they...
But that's what we need.
We weren't founded by Muslims. We weren't founded by atheists. We were founded by
and the founders.
That's right. They were men of
Everything was
Christian
about
faith.
Washington. I read that in the book. Washington counted over something like 62 or 63 times during the Revolution, where it was this close to have
Total failure.
Total failure. 62 times, but he kept insisting. He says, I kept praying, and it was only by the hand of providence. He doesn't use the word God. Right? That's the other thing about
God. That was a term that was used by God.
It's an Anglo-Saxon term, meaning ultimate good. But they always use the word providence, the guiding hand of divine providence.
John Adams is my second favorite father next to George Washington. He wrote a letter to the militia unit in Massachusetts, and it was after he was president. He was probably dated, so when it was dated, and he said that this Constitution is for a religious and moral people only. It is wholly inadequate
for any other nation.
And this is why we're having a problem. And you look at the moral decline in our nation, and sometimes where is it more apparent? In the churches themselves. When you go to one of these so-called gay pride rallies and you see half the people who belong to some kind of church, they're out there. So yeah, that's a big issue too. And we can have all kinds of laws passed, all kinds of elections, all kinds of Tea Party rallies, but if we can't get our act together morally, it's a waste of time. Morality and freedom are inseparable.
Exactly.
I don't care. And I have a lot of libertarian friends, and most of them are morally upright people. You can't enforce people. You can't make people be good, but the laws reflect a culture. And when laws change, as much as they've been changing lately, it shows our culture is in decline.
It is.
And how many generations do we have left? If we don't reverse that, I don't know. I mean, I know people were calling it, when Barry Goldwater wasn't reelected, they thought it was the end of the world.
Well, I just finished another piece in my blog. I was talking again about Common Core. That if you already look at our educational system now, I think my generation, I'm 50 years, you said you were what, 55? 55, I'm 50 years old. I think our generation was probably the last generation to get I'm not going to use the word a faith-based education, but we weren't afraid to talk about God. We weren't afraid to, I remember prayer in school. I remember that when I was a little child. I remember that. I think we were the last generation to see that. We are now several generations past with the dumbing down of our education system. I mean, we quite literally now have, and please don't take this the wrong way, audience, we now have dumbed down parents because they went to dumbed down education, having dumbed down kids themselves. You see what I'm saying? Going to schools. So we're already past that. I think we're losing the generation.
Let me get to the dumbed down is that we have 3 generations of statists-minded people.
Yes.
The government, the humanists are the ones that, John Dewey, the father of progressive education.
Yes.
I hate to use the word progressive when it comes to socialism. There's nothing progressive.
There's nothing progressive
socialism.
Well, they changed the names to protect the guilty.
That's right. So he said we have to use the classrooms as a preacher uses a pulpit. So what we have in essence are state-run schools, government-controlled schools, and those government-controlled schools are turning out little government advocates of big government. That's the nature. If you send your child to a parochial school, a Catholic school, the product would be somebody who has a Catholic worldview. That's the purpose of that. If I send my child to a Baptist school, you hope they would come out with a Christian Baptist. That's the purpose of it. You send your child to a humanist school, which is a public school or government school, the result has to be a humanist mindset. You can't have any other. So if I expose my child to evolution, socialism, moral degeneracy, 5 days a week, 7 or 8 months out of the year, 9 months out of the year, what would I expect?
Exactly.
And I can't stand these parents who will say, well, they come home and they call me a fascist because I don't recycle. Oh, that's funny. I deprogram them. Really? You can have them for what, 1 or 2 hours at quality time a week?
Yeah.
And they have them, the socialists have them, the rest of the week. Then they have the control of the mass media, so they're watching it. You watch a movie, you think, oh, it's a cute little movie, and they always inject. It was just for a minute. They were promoting. It was a nice little sweet, harmless little boy giving a speech about W.E.B. Du Bois, like he was some kind of great. I said, this guy was we joined the Communist Party. I said, that's the kind of people. That's what you get. So even in where you don't even expect it, you get it. Or you watch a scene in a movie and there's something about global warming. You don't see a lot of flags. You see a lot of global warming or some other type of leftist propaganda stuck in there.
Exactly. So what's next for you? What's next for?
Well, we're
going
going
to That's all right.
That's right.
So what's next?
I'll be out on the road later on this next week, speaking to groups in Vermont and New Hampshire. I was up in Maine this past week. We actually visited the Maine State House. They're out of session, So I stopped in there and I thought I'd leave some of these reprints off, and I ran into the head of the Republican Party in the Senate Republican leader, and he said, "Yep, I don't like this, it's a bad idea, so that's what we're going to do." And we encourage your viewers to give me a call. I'm right here in Boston.
Yeah, I'll post everything up.
Okay, I'm on. This is my full-time job, and I don't want to be like the Maytag repairman sitting around in my office and not getting phone calls. But we're out and about. Coming up, in July we have summer.
How long have you been a Birch?
I joined in 1988.
Really?
And I've been on staff since 1990.
Have you always been more conservative, constitutionalist?
Well, I
went through a catharsis. I was raised by quite literally a Kennedy liberal brother, and it took me a long
Kennedy liberal today is a moderate conservative.
I mean, I was raised in a left house.
Well, I remember
for a long time.
I think I was in the 6th grade, and the teacher made reference to Joseph McCarthy in a negative context. And I asked why was he a bad man? And she said, well, he was mean to communists. And I thought, well, what's wrong with that? Because I remember reading about communist guerrillas killing Americans in Vietnam, and they said, how can these poor Americans fight these guerrillas? I was thinking not the French Guerre, but I was thinking about guerrillas. You know, the big hairy ones. So I was always, and my dad had a drugstore in the Hyde Park section of Boston, and we were robbed quite often. This is late 60s.
Yeah, Hyde Park area was bad during that time.
And we saw people getting away. They'd arrest these folks. The state rep would be defending. He was also an attorney defending the bad guys. And my father was the evil capitalist. A little mom. Forced busing came around. And then forced busing came around.
And how riots. I remember riots and the fights.
And I remember how how government inspired all that and motivated all that. Mm-hmm. People make conscious choices to do right or wrong, but it's a lot easier when these government sitting back and just watching. We'll see what happens. And you saw the black and whites who are probably not much better off, fighting each other when the real problem was what was happening in Washington D.C. and the politicians and local politicians as well.
Exactly.
So I guess I was always a conservative-minded person, and I was raised that way.
And you had a religious background too when you family?
Yeah, we went to a congregational church that was probably more moderate. Mm-hmm. Today they're very, very liberal. But I'm a Christian. I would call myself
my grandmother was Catholic, but my mother, she leaned more towards the Protestant side. So I had not a strict Protestant upbringing, but it was in our house. It was all over the place.
But you see,
even still, I ended up being a liberal. I remember in high school and stuff. Very, very leftist, very liberal, not communist, just liberal, just Democrat. You know what I'm saying? Believe me, I understood communism. I wasn't a fan of communism at all ever in my life, but I was always voting. I was voting the party ticket. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I think it was.
You like Jimmy Carter?
Yeah, Jimmy Carter. I was too young to vote for him, but I was a big Carter fan.
Mondale.
Mondale. It was a Mondale election that I was 18 and able to vote. I voted for Mondale. It was
forgiven.
But I know. But what I'm saying is, it happened in the Gulf War. I think when the Gulf War happened in 91, that really changed it for me because I started hearing everyone screaming and yelling about, oh, it's a war for oil, and oh, our military, and then getting down to, oh, we don't know how to fight in the desert, we don't have the parts, and it's never going to work. That's all I kept hearing was how horrible America was, we're going to lose, it's turning into another Vietnam, and that was the trigger that changed it. Also, the fact that I got a divorce at the time, and being a male in the state of Massachusetts, I ended up getting screwed. Now here I am being a liberal my whole life, standing up for equality and rights and everything else, and I'm watching our troops get lambasted halfway across the world, and I'm getting lambasted in the courtroom. So I was like, you know what, I've been playing for the wrong team.
Well, that's good. Sometimes it takes things like the old saw about conservatives, a liberal who's loved.
Yeah.
Let me recommend some things.
Sure, go ahead. We're going to wrap this up.
We have a lot of reports, and most of these available on our website, jbs.org. One of them is the article Levin's risky proposal that came out in the summer of 2013. We've been using this reprint to help educate elected officials, and it should be used for anybody. Then, nullification versus the Constitution Convention, how to save a republic from nullification. It's about an eight-page article. written by Joe Wolverton.
That's all in the new one.
And also the one just came out by my colleague in Appleton, Wisconsin, Christopher Gomez, working together to rewrite the Constitution, how the left and right can be
And
represented.
that's what we were talking about.
And this is something you want to give to your conservative friend who supported Article 5. If you have a liberal friend, give this one, Levin's risk proposal, because Mark Levin, half the time he spends just trashing Obama, which is probably something that a lot of the liberals don't like to hear. So they're not going to like Levin, so you're not like Levin, you should like his call for an Article 5 convention. So,
Al, thank you very much.